All right. So hi, everybody. My name is Brian Moynihan. I'm the head of health technology and informatics here at the Health Sciences Library at UNC. And we have two presenters today that are both pretty amazing. Nick Allen and Brian Batista talking about their thesis projects that used VR in some way. So with that, I'll let Nick take it away.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to introduce you guys to my master's capstone project entitled There at the Bridge. It is essentially a virtual reality listening room for oral histories that are discussing death and dying. If you want to hit a slide, Brian. I was inspired by addressing end-of-life outcomes in America where most people do not receive the kind of death that they might say that they wanted in healthier times. And this is partially in conjunction with our cultural denial of death, oftentimes up until the very end. So one way that I thought about attacking that was to create an exposure to sort of a real death by using oral histories and these stories that people tell about death to illuminate what it's really like and get us more comfortable hearing about it, talking about it, as a way to increase end-of-life conversations, which are often touted as the most effective way to receive the best end-of-life care. And my other inspiration for this project was getting people to engage with oral history more. As an oral historian at the Southern Oral History Program, we're always thinking of ways to get people to listen to oral histories. We take a lot of them, we transcribe them all, and researchers use them, but mostly just by engaging with the transcript for the content. But when you hear an oral history, there's sort of a different thing that happens with the orality of the experience that we think is important, but is also super boring to just click on SoundCloud and hear someone start talking. You lose track super quickly. The browser finds its way to other places. So I tried to create this immersive environment to really get people to engage with these oral histories. And the purpose of this project was not really for entertainment, but it was to use VR as a way to sort of operate upon our cultural understanding of death. For taking the oral histories, it's basically just a ton of recording. I took about 15 total interviews. I did not use all of them for this project, and I took clips that I thought were relevant and arranged them within this listening room so you can select it, and then you're transported to a graveyard and you start to hear this clip about death, so you're confronting your morality. The other thing about the oral history portion is that there is a ton of community networking to get all this to happen. And when I was collecting these interviews, there's a certain weight that starts to gather on you as you carry around all these stories. So I kind of needed some catharsis and some time to process them all while I was doing it. I didn't expect it to be so heavy to engage with them. So hopefully only a portion of that will be encapsulated in this project. For the VR portion, I use an Insta360 Pro that I borrowed from the undergraduate library to take all the 360 photos of the graveyards. Wanda VR is the app that I used to create the interface. It's a great application. It's really accessible, but it's not without its limitations and even a couple bugs right now at this stage. The intuitiveness of the UI is almost there, but there's a few little things where you sort of struggle to get the tool to work. And then the one bug I found is when you're moving around elements within the interface, sometimes they snap back to where they are. So it's like you're constantly having to double check yourself while you're in that part of the interface, which is frustrating. In terms of dissemination, this was one of the most frustrating things because I tried a bunch of ways to make this shareable within an immersive VR tool. The HTC Vive hypothetically works. According to Wanda, it works. I could not get it to work in a number of places that I tried that had HTC Vives. Using it, just viewing it in your desktop browser is underwhelming and doesn't really create the immersion that I think is necessary to experience these oral histories. Cell phone with a head-mounted display really depends on your head-mounted display in your cell phone. It's okay, but still underwhelming. Eventually, I ended up using an Oculus Go with the help of the J School, because they have a ton of them. Great resources for setting that up. And that became a great way to get Wanda out there, although that does pose accessibility issues for others. So we're just going to take Hope you guys can see that all right. A quick tour of what the interface is like, and if you'd like to access it after this is over, we can show that, but let's, oh, thank you. That helps a little bit. This is a screen grab of the oral history listening room. This is the hub that I used to take you through all of these oral histories, and these would be different clips taken from the interview with each narrator around a topic or a story. When you gaze over them for 3 seconds, you're transported to another graveyard scene somewhere else in the area around here, and the oral history begins to play. So we're looking around within the graveyard, confronting graves, and hearing about our immortality. This is what that scene looks like in the Wanda viewer when you're in the interface. So all these things are just sort of stacked up, and there's a ton of elements and a ton of links in there. But pretty straightforward development-wise. You can really see what you're working with and access everything from that screen. This is what the storyboard process looks like. If you're using Wanda, this is also really straightforward and great for access. These are all the black lines that you can barely see are links that are connecting the hub to everything else that's involved in the scene. Here's an example of one of the graveyards that you're taken into. This is the one on campus. I had it set up so these tags fade away as the oral history is playing, and you're almost without interruption as you're looking around. There is a button down here that says return to hub to help you exit out. So that's the only thing that sort of breaks the illusion of the reality. This is another one. You can see the tag is fading away and we're in the graveyard. This is Cheek Cemetery, which is, I assume, on private property, and then I was trespassing when I took this photo. Because I parked in someone's driveway and walked a long way in the woods with Google Maps held up, finding my way. But it's a really interesting cemetery. There's lots of stones on the ground, lots of unmarked stones, and one very official looking stone for a woman named Mary, in this sort of haunting woods with down trees and utter silence. Sort of a holy place, I think. A little bit of the process of production. When you're out there with the Insta360, in most of the shots, I'm hiding behind a headstone and making sure that my shadow isn't available. In this cemetery, which is the Judeo Reform Cemetery, that was not an option because it's a field. And so I finally found a way, which I should have thought of initially, to get myself out of the shot. So there's me taking the picture, holding the iPad up. If you go to the next slide, you'll see I took the same photo, standing in a different position, and then just scrubbed myself out with Photoshop.
Huh.
One more. So there's the finished photo. You can see that's my shadow right there, which I was not able to get out. And this is where the shadow of the camera was removed.
Oh.
If this was higher resolution, you could see that I'm not a pro with Photoshop, and like this little pattern of the grass repeats itself down as I wash it out. So there's a couple places where that happens.
Back a little bit to see it.
Yeah, you can click through that a couple times.
That's interesting.
You can see I don't know if the camera moved or if the sun set a little bit more, but the shadows kind of change. But not enough that you'd really notice while you're in the experience that there was someone standing there. So, another struggle with this was camera placement. So there's the shadow of the camera right there that you can see, and I didn't even attempt to scrub it out of that grave with all the angles. There's another one where I misplaced it among the trees. So if you're looking for these, you can find out, and sort of, it breaks the illusion. Here's an example of where I had a perfect setup of this tree's shadow to hide the camera in. I'm not sure where I was hiding in that one, probably behind that tree. One of the limitations of the Insta360 is that the iPad does not have a huge range because it connects through Wi-Fi. So in most of these, you'll see that there is something close by so that I can be hiding.
So these are stills.
These are all stills, yeah. Oh, you didn't go with any video on this one.
You could do video too, and you could do the 10 seconds and hide. You could hit and run.
Yeah. You can. So yeah, just a little bit of the process behind the experience. This is my slide on how I was conceiving of VR as a tool to operate upon our culture, using the qualities that we find in VR, particularly immersion and presence. Immersion being the objective quality of sensory input pertaining to the extent to which something feels real that is not real. So if we're immersed in it, we feel like the VR is real. And I think that the resolution of the photos and the clarity of the voice that we hear the oral history contributes to that. And presence is what takes us somewhere else. So being present in the graveyard adds to that. And finally, being VR, the sense of slowing down and exploring the moment, getting to explore these graveyards, getting to explore these stories. And I think with this experience, it's important to really take the time to get into it and reflect on it. Hopefully all of these things contribute to empathy. By taking us out of ourselves, getting us into another place, getting us into another person's life, we're able to sort of bracket from consciousness the division between ourselves and another, and what Heinz conceived of as empathy. His example was the relationship between a therapist and her patient. They're sort of letting down their sense of themselves and their own feelings to empathize with each other in a back and forth way. And I think that VR accomplishes this in some sense through oral history as well. So that's the operation. Limitations here, degrees of ability. If you're blind or you're deaf, you obviously will not enjoy this experience very much. Another level of that might be your level of mobility. If you're in a hospital bed and you can't turn 360, there's 4 or 5 whole rows of stories that you won't be able to interact with. Or, you know, if you have paralysis of any kind, those types of things will sort of detract from the experience. And I'm not sure if someone in VR must be thinking about how to make these things fully accessible, but that was not something I was able to tackle with Wanda and with the Oculus Go. Accessibility to another level in terms of cell phones. My audience here was a younger generation in America that is not dealing with the idea of their death. My narrators are all elderly, and they have confronted this, and most of them feel very comfortable talking about it. So the audience for the project is younger, but if I wanted to share this with my narrators, they've got to have some sense of interacting in VR. They've got to have a cell phone, perhaps a head-mounted display, and all those things sort of stack up against an older generation interacting with virtual reality. And finally, context. We debated, in my defense, whether this project stands alone as a virtual reality experience, or whether you need to read my critical paper that I wrote in order to understand the operation that we're trying to perform. I think there's something to be said for experiencing oral histories without context. Just hearing another person's story and hearing that voice really pulls you in, but you may not understand exactly the effect that I'm trying to create without having a little more foregrounding than the actual experience provides. So one more slide. There's my citations. One more. If you want to access either of those things, there's a QR code. You can just take a picture with your cell phone, or I think most cameras have a way to access them. So if you have the Wanda app, you can use the one on the left to download the project, and then the paper is on the right, and that'll just be a PDF download straight.
Great.
That is all I have.
Thanks. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I was when I brought up the video question. There is a possible way to do that with video green screen. You sit here about basically putting it on and basically can make while you're shooting that you have on that, and then there's some technique that I'm not sure exactly how it works. I know in the green screen situation is easy.
Right.
But actually, if you live in the situation, there's something where it basically become masked in post-production.
Interesting.
That,
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Okay.
I also found that, and this might have been my post-production technique, but I did experiment with some video with the Insta360 Pro. Recording audio is difficult, which would not have been an issue for this project. But the resolution also goes down a little bit. And I felt like it was, especially in a place that's as still as a graveyard, it was more important to have high resolution video. But yeah, I think, I don't know how I would expand this project to involve video, but
I think the choice of resolution is better. It's a better choice, whether the video is more or less gimmicky. it can be gimmicky. But you know, it is a possibility. That it could be
Right.
done.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested to know about the green screen or the green suit.
Or
I
just-
also am just picturing myself in a cemetery in a green, anti-green suit with this camera. Like I already felt sick weird all the time taking this camera around the cemeteries. So the green suit just adds a level. I mean, someone's got to follow me around with the camera.
So I had the benefit of reading the critical paper and seeing the VR2, and I think the two absolutely complement each other in a way that either one of them alone would not do. And as we were talking about it and saying you could experience it sort of directly, the oral history, or you could see the theory and what you're trying to do. It reminded me of art, like, and to be in an art museum or something and just look at a painting and just directly experiencing it versus, you know, looking who painted it, what it was painted on, and then having somebody come around and tell you the whole story it was in it and what was going on. And then, and there's value in both, but it kind of sounds like that.
Yeah.
And I think what you're doing here is a combination that has not really been done. I think it's a combination of three interesting things. The VR, oral history, those things alone haven't been combined very much at all. And then adding that to the layer of depth. So I think that some of the discussions here, we can think about like techniques and pixels and things like that, but we could also go from completely different perspectives and talk about the content itself, or talk about how it changes oral history, etc.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what kind of audience I'll have today. So I went more technical VR, but there's obviously a lot of cultural discussion that I think is important here. And I'm interested to know, or you know, if I was going to test sort of the efficacy of this project, there might be a group that, similar to the art museum analogy, experiences the painting first, and then experiences, you know, the ways that you're guided through understanding the painting. But I'd love to know people's perceptions of just the painting. And how, you know, how they might interpret that, and how opening that up away from my own limited criticism might bring some great ideas to bear that I hadn't thought of.
And you had also mentioned the interaction for people who are mobilely disabled or didn't have full mobility. Could it work to actually have buttons, or some way that they actually could navigate around the scene with basically just controls? More or less have controls available on the screen that they could access, and then they could spin the scene around their viewpoint versus inside. Right?
So I think, I mean, it may be possible.
Yeah.
I don't know where that would come in to the technology. Maybe through the Wanda interface.
I mean, you can do like grab the scene from Wanda, face in the one direction. That's your vision one. Then have buttons on the bottom, just like flip the scene 45 degrees, and you just throw the scene in Premiere and change the front facing of the scene to like 45 degrees.
Right. Yeah.
So it'd essentially be 4 times as big, and every time you hit a button, you basically switch to another person.
Right. You could go to a different place. Interesting.
I was thinking a couple hacks. Like one, if you had it on your phone, you can change it on your phone and then put it into a device. On an Oculus Go, you can set the center of your scene by holding down the button. So if you pointed that behind you when you press down the button, maybe that would recenter. I haven't tried that, but there's all these little hacks. But it's one of the things that I want to call it the Starlight project, which has been done to bring VR to kids in cancer hospitals. One of the things that they did is assume that they were lying in bed. So the assumed position for most people is standing up. The assumed for this is the exact opposite. So they just flipped the virtual world. So you're expecting someone to be staring at the ceiling rather than staring at the wall.
Cool. Yeah, I think hacking is like those unofficial hacks is probably the way to go, because if you're able to sort of spin the scene around you without anything moving, that may contribute to motion sickness.
Right. And make it an option. Somebody wants to experience it by moving through it themselves.
Right.
That's the primary experience. But they can't do that to allow the navigation buttons as a way to navigate the scene without from the same perspective. So move the scene versus just yourself.
Right. Yeah, I think that probably would work in the Oculus. I haven't tried it, but it's a great idea.
Have you had an experience working with the Oculus from the pediatrics perspective that has anything to bear on all this?
Motion sickness has come up, and willingness and kind of technological savvy also come we're dealing with 7 to 18-year-olds in our study, and every single one of them is more or less familiar with computers and iPads, and about half of them we encountered are familiar in one form or another with a headset of one form. That may not hold true for, like you said, the elderly generation. We haven't had that big of an issue for us. But the orientation of the atmosphere and the environment was the tricky to navigate at first. We basically have all of our study subjects sitting up, and then occasionally we'll have to reorient and recenter the screen.
Yeah, think about it as a seated chair, a swirly chair experience generally.
Yeah.
A chair that you can swirl around
Right.
easily. Yeah.
But the Oculus, the app that we use, the Oculus Go, has like a 45-degree switch that you can use just swiping back and forth on the handset changes the view by about 45 degrees.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, what's the app?
It's Nature Trends.
Okay.
And you do that 4 or 5 times, and you basically go over 360.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's great.
And another guide, you probably looked at it. There's actually some publications on rules of VR, things that you were addressing, the motion sickness. And actually, some people come up with techniques to reduce the motion sickness for initial interaction with VR. And it tends to be that people get more used to it and get less motion sickness. But initially, some people do get motion sickness. So just kind of look at those as some tips on how to create an experience in a way that, your initial contact, creates the least amount of discomfort.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, in my experiences, just don't have the camera move. I'm not feeling good when that camera's moving, no matter what the experience is.
We also had a similar experience where we limit the experience to 30 minutes to help avoid some of those side effects. We had one patient, I think it was 11 or 12, take the headset off, and then was going like this, and it took him a minute to kind of regain, his perception on real reality, because he was so immersed. So that was interesting to see as well.
Field of view is sensitive to how much you have to see me actually show at one time. I'm not sure if the narrower view or the wider view is the one.
Interesting. Yeah. I sort of shared that coming to feeling after taking the headset off when I was troubleshooting this, which I wasn't expecting, and again, it was sort of this emotional weight of being there. I was like having a moment in my kitchen, taking the headset off. I was like, oh my God, that was like really heavy.
Yeah.
Which I did not really anticipate, because I was there when the oral history was taken. I've heard these clips a bunch of times when I'm doing the post-processing stuff. But it really did become something different when it was combined, this sense of fusion. Something else happened when it was added to VR. Not to toot my horn, that felt more like dumb luck. That does I did find it to be very effective.
And I would hope to see that you could continue this and bring it to nursing homes or experiment like a pop-up somewhere where younger people could try it. Or
Right. We'll probably do a pop-up at the SOHP where I work next week with the Oculus Bar, and just to share my research with them.
Yeah.
Because they're all like, oral history and VR, that sounds so cool, but like it just sounds cool. There's no conception of what that is really like yet. So I would share with them. And then one of the sort of methodological best practices of oral history is to return that history that we've taken back to the people that shared the history. So I would like to take this back, particularly to Galloway Ridge, which is a community where I took many of my interviews, and have the adventure of putting a VR headset on a 98-year-old and letting her hear her voice. I think would be pretty cool. So.
One thing I wanted to say that came up in a discussion of your project too is it's just a point of perspective, that it really matters where the camera is. So if it's at 6 feet tall, or if it's right on the ground, or next to the leaves, and you feel like you're sort of in the grave, sort of when it's being done. And we were even talking today that what would happen if you were like 15 feet in the air, like more of a disembodied floating feeling above a cemetery. It could give yet another feeling. And I think as a photographer, you're thinking, I'm setting up the pole, you know, I'm hitting the button,
Right.
not necessarily thinking about when you experience it, and that's you, you know, and you look down and up and you're in that position. It matters a lot, like where that position is.
I definitely use the ground technique, and I try to couple with the tripod fully extended. So there are shots where you're about 10 feet, I would guess, off the ground with that tripod. But I think that you need to be more to really notice it, to really notice the distance from the ground. There's not much to cue you in VR that you're, you know, the distance from the ground, unless the ground is like right here. So yeah, some kind of floating camera or just a massive tripod would be really cool to see, especially over a graveyard. Patterns start to emerge in the headstands that I think are cool.
Yeah, and I would think that, like, for kids, for instance, whatever you assume the average height for a kid to be, if they were to be in that experience.
I also love about that because I'm very tall, so
yeah.
Am I going to set this up at 6'6"?
Right.
Or like, you know, where am I going to put this for my user? Yeah. Thankfully, that, you know, depth didn't matter too much here. If you're doing a video experience or we're talking to each other, I think that it matters a lot more. But
yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So, all right, let me figure out the technological part of this a little bit.
You could just like go to the other one. Escape.
Well, I hit something, so I think we're still recording. And let me share again that picture. Good. And then come here. It's all right. Any mouse here? Any mouse? Anybody's get a mouse? There we go. That's what we're looking for. It's down. And let me make sure we're still recording. Looks good. And I'll give you a quick intro too, if you don't mind. It's allowing me to click further, but not back. Here we go. Okay.